it's supposed to feel.
What's good, everybody, and welcome back to the channel for another episode of our Madden 23 expansion draft only franchise here with the San Antonio Express. We are here for the Season 5 Stats, Awards, and Highlights episode prior to the Super Bowl. No face cam for this one, as mostly we're just going to be showing highlights, and you don't need to see my face to see the highlights. Without further ado, let's get into these highlights, starting here with Brandon Nash, who, looking at the comparison between this year and last, of course, the interceptions you notice are a lot higher, but the sacks are lower, the touchdowns are higher, the rating is higher, yards per attempt is up 1.3. He just threw a lot less attempts, which is why he has a little bit less yardage. Rushing numbers almost exactly the same. I guess he tripled his broken tackles, but they're both small numbers. And when we talk about Brandon Nash this year, I think he got better as a passer. There were just more consistent throws in tight windows that you saw that were converted. That's kind of what led to that, higher yards per attempt. Increased interceptions is, of course, unfortunate. I think both in the games that we played as well as in the simulated games, he was just throwing a lot more picks this year. Maybe year two, the confidence is up there after he won MVP. That, now he thinks he's really good. I mean, he is, but kind of you have that irrational confidence sometimes, and that can result in some more turnovers. But I think overall, obviously a big playmaker, and with 59 total touchdowns, you have to wonder if he's still in the MVP race. The high interception total might take him out of it a little bit, but I don't know. I think he'll at least be towards the top. I don't know if he'll end up winning it for the second straight year. So I guess we'll just have to see as the awards are towards the end of this episode. I'm really happy to have Nash as our quarterback. Got up to 99 speed. So he's a playmaker in and out of the pocket, of course, with his legs as well, as we'll see a little bit later in the highlight reel. I still feel like maybe my expectations are just way too high in terms of him as like throwing on the run, but I feel like he throws inaccurately on the run a decent bit of the time. But yeah, maybe that's just because, I don't know, I expect it to be so high, because he still makes plenty of good throws on the run as well. And as we're looking at him here as a runner, this is where he's obviously special. 99 speed with like 6'4" too. Or I guess 6'4" as well. He's not 6 foot, whatever. You know what I'm talking about. Both as a scrambler and on design quarterbacks runs, he gets it done. 2 straight years with 12 rushing touchdowns at quarterback is kind of nuts. Not something you see very often. I believe Jalen Hurts in his 2 years as a starter has gotten 10 plus touchdowns on the ground. I think he's the only one. I didn't like check this stat or anything, so don't, come at me saying that I'm, straight up capping. That's just a hypothesis. All right. Maybe not exactly facts. Love this guy in terms of whether or not he's meeting my expectations. Yeah, he met my expectations this year, except for the turnovers. Those were unfortunate, but some of those are my fault. Kevon Simmons, 32 yards, broke the NFL single season rushing record for rushing yards on the year. Had a ton of carries. 375 carries is a lot. 6.2 per carry though, with 103 broken tackles, nearly double his previous career high. Was awesome. He continues to decline in terms of catches every year, but I mean, this year as a runner, like, this was my favorite run of the year. Just absolutely sits Derwin James down on the turf. He is honestly the perfect back. I know I said it last year with the stats and awards, but I'm just not used to having one back that does everything for the squad. I usually like to run two back systems, but man, Kevon Simmons, I have never had as much fun using a back in Madden as I have using Kevon Simmons. He has the speed and the acceleration, the change of direction and everything to hit big plays, but he also has the size and the strength to like consistently get 4 yards. There's really no downside to running the ball with Kevon Simmons, like, at all. We started to employ this season after that Bengals game a kind of a new strategy. I mean, I'd kind of done it before with Devin Hamilton, but for very different reasons. It's just because we didn't trust Devin Hamilton. This time, we employed the strategy of just like running the clock out by just pounding them into submission with Kevon Simmons. This time we employed the strategy mostly to keep the opposing team's offense off the field. Of course, I trust Brandon Nash. We just went over him. He's really good. When it comes to the best player on the team, I think there's little argument that it's Kevon Simmons. You could make the argument that Brandon Nash is, but like I said, there are parts of Brandon Nash's game that maybe I would hope could be slightly better. I have no complaints about Kevon Simmons whatsoever. Yes, he doesn't have a ton of receiving yards, but I really don't throw the ball his way. When we do, I feel like he makes the play as often as I would expect a running back to make the play. Even downfield, even though his ratings aren't that great, he's just that special of a player. Consistently breaking tackles, 103 broken tackles this year is nuts. So, man, I have nothing but good things to say here. He exceeded my expectations this year, and I had expectation that he was the best running back in the league. So that's really saying something. 2,300 yards. That is the single season rushing record, even in this sim, both in like real life, and nobody has had higher than that in the 5 years of this franchise either. We see a little bit right here of him as a punt returner. He was that for the entirety of the year, and this is really the only highlight punt return we had all year. So I wish he could be a little bit more electric there, but I mean, that's like the nitpickiest of all nitpicks you could possibly be with a player of this caliber. Perhaps in future seasons, I could maybe look to expand his role in terms of as a receiver, but I don't really feel like we need to. Maybe if we had a deficiency in passing options, but as we'll get to the passing options here after Kevon, I don't feel like we have a deficiency there at all. I just think this is a team built to run the ball, and we have easily the best running back in the league behind, this team that's built around him. So that's what's gotten us to this point. That's what's gotten us to the Super Bowl is Kevon Simmons. And I think he's one of the players on the short list that maybe have a chance to, when their career is said and done, to be the best of all time at their position. Kevon Simmons is definitely on that list. He's had a ton of consistent high yards every single year of his career on the ground. So he could be, a all-time rushing leader, all the good stuff. This is the first year he led the league, though. Typically, like Jonathan Taylor and Derrick Henry have been above him. Maybe he's been in the top 5, but he led it this year. Now let's move on here to Eddie Hazelton. Career high in yards and touchdowns, averaged 20 yards a catch, third highest in catches, highest run after the catch. We talk about Eddie Hazelton. Last year I talked about how I wasn't necessarily disappointed, but I was maybe slightly worried about the dip in production. And the reason I was is because I knew a season like this was something that he was capable of. Absolutely satisfied with what we saw from Eddie Hazelton. I feel like, I don't know if it was his development or maybe the development of Brandon Nash, but we were able to more consistently find this man down the field than we have been in the first 4 years. And I think that's a big part of why we're undefeated in the first 4 years of the franchise, because he's been here since the beginning. I really felt like he was the second receiving option, right? It was Lewis Smart was the easy one. He was the easy 2. Drop off after that. This year, honestly, I feel like he's more 1B. I found myself running plays where he was my primary option more consistently than I have in years past. Typically, I was doing whatever I can to get Lewis Smart touches, and we still did that, don't get me wrong, but the emergence of Eddie Hazelton as a consistent downfield threat was great to see. One thing that you could say maybe we could get better at is getting him underneath touches with an opportunity for him to get some run after the catch and make plays that way. And when you're talking about your receiver 1, yeah, you want to get him those, easy touches, 5 yards down the field with room to run. But really, that's not his role. We have our number 1 underneath guy is Lewis Smart. All we ask him to do is be a deep threat, and he has been elite at doing that. And yeah, evidenced by his best year ever this time around. He also made some more tight window catches like you see right here. This year, I feel like there's still some drops there. That's always kind of been the weakness of his game is he's very often is he wide open, but when he's not, he tends to not come down with it. This year he did a little bit better, but I think that might be one thing keeping him from being like a true number 1 target by himself. That's kind of been what Lewis Smart is good at, though, so they're a really good complement to each other. The offense, number 1 in the league this year, and I think it's because what we saw from the run game as well as our 2 top pass catchers are so complementary with each other. Everything works on the offense. I feel like we're good at anything. We might be built around the run, but I think if we were a pass-heavy offense, it would still be really good because of the quality of our top 2 receiving weapons. It's also the stats he had this year could also lead to him becoming X Factor. I'd imagine he is towards the top of the league. I haven't looked at everyone. I looked at Kevon Simmons just because his number was so absurd, and I found that he does have the record. But I imagine he's at least in the top 5 in receiving. He actually had some touchdowns this year as well, so I think he might get that dev up. Joey Vasquez is the second receiver we're going to talk about here. Just over 500 yards on 39 receptions and 8 touchdowns. Joey Vasquez, I think it's hard to say that I'm disappointed in his rookie season. 538 yards isn't a ton, but on 39 receptions, he scored 8 touchdowns, which is good. I mean, when you're talking about a 6'4" receiver, you hope he's good out when you're in, range to score, and he certainly was. The one thing I would say if I'm disappointed, it would be I feel like he was not open very often at all compared to somebody who we'll talk about next that's, lower rated. I just felt like when we threw to him, it was contested more often than anyone else. I guess he's kind of like the wide receiver version of Lewis Smart though, where he can get those contested balls and haul them in, which you expect from the 6'4" receiver. But in terms of like size and speed, he really is close to Lewis Smart. So you just got to think of him maybe more like that than a true receiver. The third receiver in our passing game that really had much of a role was Jalen Turner, with 785 yards on 51 receptions, 6 touchdowns. He once again missed a decent portion of the season, which 2 years in a row now, you have to be concerned about that, because he would be further along in his development without those injuries. But man, just like the report that we had on his rookie season, the man is always open. I feel like he gets open even more consistently than a guy like Eddie Hazelton. I mean, maybe Eddie Hazelton has more attention on him, and so that's why. But every single time I was looking Jalen Turner's way, he seemed to have the space to make the play. He was somebody that I love to have as like a second option on the play, because if option 1 wasn't there, I just had a good feeling that Jalen Turner was going to be able to have the space to make the play on my second read. The only complaint I would have about him, honestly, is the fact that he's been injured for long stretches 2 years in a row now. He's normal dev. Those stats, he's not going to get up to star dev at the end of this season. So he's going to be going into year 3 as normal dev. I think didn't Michael Franklin get star by the time he was in his 3rd year? So in terms of players that actually play for us, he's going to be, I think, the only guy who's normal dev going into year 3 starting with us. At least to the guys that I drafted to be long-term stars. I'm not talking about kind of maybe the stopgap players that played for us for the first 3 years in franchise history. But even with, maybe the low overall and the low dev, it's hard to complain about his production when we play. Lewis Smart, when you look at his stats, maybe not his best year, second highest in touchdowns and average, but second lowest in catches and yards. But the man was steady as he ever has been. Making plays downfield, short, whatever you need him to do, break tackles. He is as steady as it gets, and kind of like what I talked about with Eddie Hazelton, a perfect complement. Eddie Hazelton's the big playmaker, while Lewis Smart is the dependable target. I mean, and we've seen here in this highlight, he is also very capable of making the big plays himself. I talked about Kevon Simmons being the best player on the team, and I believe that's true. Lewis Smart is my favorite player on the team, because we didn't draft him as a generational prospect, right? He was certainly good. He was, a 75 overall star dev when we drafted him. But he's become a generational level tight end. He has 5 straight 1,000 yards receiving as tight end. 5 1,000-yard seasons would put him in contention to be the best tight end ever. Maybe already. He is second all-time in 1,000 yards receiving. Only Travis Kelce has more. I mean, he's not the greatest yet, but he's in the conversation again. Kind of what I talked about with Kevon Simmons, of the short list of people who could be the best of all time at their position. If Madden ends up not corrupting my file and we're able to see the end of these careers, I'd be very interested to see where Lewis Smart ranks among tight ends by the time he calls it quits in his career. I so hope that we get the opportunity to see it, because man, I love this player. Obviously, the speed to take those downfield routes and make more out of them. And then, of course, you always have to mention his ability as a blocker. I think, isn't his run block up to like 80 or somewhere close? I think it's high 70s still, something like that. It is actually nuts how good of a blocker he is, on top of just being really our kind of 1A option. Like I said, he's been option 1 with a bullet most years until this year. And again, it's not because Lewis Smart has done anything to deserve a demotion or anything. It's just because I feel like Eddie Hazelton has finally kind of grown into a number one option kind of player. But, you know, I'll never complain about having two number one receivers on my team. And kind of talked about how this team is built to run the ball. Lewis Smart is the main reason that's the case. Yes, we have a good offensive line, but I feel like it's not incredibly difficult to get a good offensive line in Madden. What's difficult is finding a tight end who is as incredible of a dual threat as Leonard Smart. Lewis Smart. His name is not Leonard. Leonard is the Chargers tight end. And so, yeah, Lewis Smart, it's hard to imagine I'll ever draft a tight end that I'll like better than him. Luis Sanchez now 511 yards on 49 catches and 5 touchdowns. A marked improvement over last year when he didn't even get on the highlight reel because he just had no role and he was injured for a large portion of the year. But I feel like he went back to the player that I drafted him originally to be, you know, a tight end 2 who makes plays mostly in the short to intermediate range. We never really did much targeting him downfield. He doesn't really have game-breaking speed. Unfortunately, this will be his last season with us as he wants $7 million a year, which, I mean, honestly kind of feels like a steal, but with all the players that we already need to pay, I just can't bring myself to pay $7 million to a backup tight end, especially when we like the tight end position in this upcoming draft, as we previewed there in the last episode of the regular season. And so I'm glad that Luis Sanchez was able to kind of end his Express tenure on a more productive season. Hopefully that earns him a better contract in free agency with somebody that can better utilize him, because once we had Jalen Turner injured, his role was increased. He played third receiver, and I think he did a good job of it. Starting here with defense, we have George McLean. Matched his TFLs from the previous year, 1.5 less sacks. And so you're thinking, what? Did he regress in year 2? And maybe a little bit, but he's still an absolute beast. I feel like in the games that we played, I don't want to say he was worse than his rookie year, but maybe just a little bit more consistent. I feel like he had a couple of monster games and a couple of games where he was pretty quiet. Whereas I think in his rookie year, he had just like really good games, like every game it felt like. But, you know, with the defensive line as talented as the one that we've been able to get here, he is still my favorite player to user. Just the combination of speed and strength is awesome. He is, if I could take just like one player for my defense, it's George McLean. I love this dude. Of course, one defensive player of the year last year. Don't really know if he'd be in the running this year. I guess we'd have to find out. I mean, he's probably in the running. I would assume he makes that top 10 chart, but it just didn't really feel as dominant of a year for me, at least. So I don't know if he wins it. I think he's our most consistent defensive lineman in terms of stats in simulation, though. It feels like every game he has a couple TFLs and a sack or something like that when we simulate. And so very happy with him. That year 4 draft with him and Brandon Nash is going to go down as like one of the best draft classes in NFL history. Of course, if we're able to continue with this franchise. Try not to bring up the fact that Madden might have permanently deleted my franchise too much, but I just can't help it because it is a really big deal. The game-winning sack there against the Browns, probably his best play of the year. Jaron Lacey, 6.5 less sacks than a year ago, maybe a little bit cause for concern, but 12 more TFLs, 26 is quite a lot. So I guess decided to become more of a run stuffer here. And our run defense felt really good this year. I feel like when we were maybe giving up more yards and more points than I wanted to, most of the game through the air, Lacey, and then the guy we're going to talk about next, and Timmy Reed. Obviously, the biggest reasons why we had so much success run stopping. Of course, linebackers play a part in that as well. In terms of when I used Jaron Lacey, I felt like he got the most inconsistent like pass rush wins, but I felt like in the run game he would get wins quite often. And so yeah, I guess this year he just decided to become more of a run stuffing player, but he was really good at it. In terms of him being my defensive tackle 2, very happy with numbers like that from a defensive tackle 2. He's probably even a pretty good defensive tackle 1, honestly. So the fact that he is second on the depth chart with those kind of numbers bodes really well for just the long-term success of this defensive line, I suppose. Talking about his counterpart and the defensive tackle 1, Timmy Reed. Last year, kind of got on Timmy Reed a little bit, saying that he needed to be better. He was our highest rated defender. Was not playing like it. This year, 14 sacks, 34 TFLs. And unlike last year where I thought the 12 sacks was kind of not an accurate description of his disruption, this year he was disruptive. I mean, I talked about Jaron Lacey being a good run defender. Timmy Reed, an absolute menace in the run game. A lot of his TFLs, like we see here, were like 3 or 4 yards in the backfield, not 1 or 2. If he got you in his paws, he was bringing you down. Very secure tackler. Was able to avoid injury for the most part. Of course, he was the culprit of us almost losing our undefeated season by getting quote-unquote injured during the Giants game. That set up their late game touchdown. So that was maybe the one blemish on an otherwise incredible year. And I just couldn't be more happy with the breakout that he had this year. I was kind of concerned with the big contract that we gave him because he didn't want to return, so we had to overpay to retain his services. And then we did that, at the beginning of year 4, and then he turned in that year 4 performance, and I was like, oh no, man, we're overpaying this guy for being, a pretty just above average defensive tackle, and we're paying him like he's elite. Yeah, well, he was elite, worth every single bit of that contract this year. Felt like even maybe more than McLean this year, he got the most consistent wins when I used him. Felt like no offensive lineman was stopping this guy from getting where he wanted to go. Getting really close to being a 99 overall. I think he will be the first 99 overall on defense. It's kind of a race between him and Quincy Boston, but yeah. I mean, this year reminded me of that rookie year when I was so high on Timmy Reed after that rookie year, just because he was kind of the lone bright spot on the defense this year. He was really good once again. Wyatt Costanzo was our least productive defensive lineman with 19 TFLs and 9 sacks. That's our least productive defensive lineman. So, yeah, our defensive line was eating this year. Still his second highest sack total and his highest TFL total. So, not like it was a bad year from Costanzo or anything. Again, having him as, number 2 on the depth chart, kind of like how we talked about with Jaron Lacey, makes me feel a lot better about, his numbers. If that was your edge 1 numbers, you'd be like, that's fine, but not really what you want. But considering, like I said, he was the least productive of our 4 starting defensive linemen this year. Yeah, I'll take that all day. Still has a pretty lethal swing move. I just feel like I maybe used him less this year than I typically did. Typically, I try to balance it out and user everyone, but I didn't do a good job this year. Michael Franklin here, career low in tackles, but a career high in TFLs. I got a couple picks, had a sack. We kind of talked about it last year with Michael Franklin. Ever since I kind of shifted my expectation of him from being like some superstar linebacker to just being like a really solid field general type linebacker, I've been pleased with what I've gotten out of him. He's not like some massive playmaker, but he doesn't make very many mistakes at all. Has the speed to just kind of fly around the field. I think where he made plays most consistently is what we've seen here with kind of the screen game. He was able to get guys behind the line of scrimmage pretty consistently on those. And just in terms of him, like, if we just consider him a solid linebacker, then he's met my expectations. Occasionally makes a play on the pass like you see there. And here as well. I think, the $11 million we gave him a year or whatever over 6 years is about what he's worth. So I'm pretty happy with it. Victor Giles, however, we gave $17 million a year. His second highest tackle total of his career. Third highest TFL, got a couple sacks, got a couple picks. We talked about complementary skill sets with Eddie Hazelton and Lewis Smarts. I felt the same way with our linebackers. I feel like he's more of our playmaker, maybe more of the flashy linebacker, and maybe that's why he's been getting, the dev-ups. I also just think it's because the outside linebacker position is very murky in Madden. And so it's a lot of edge rushers in there that aren't going to rack up tackles as often as Victor Giles. That being said, I feel like a lot of his playmaking is when we are using him on blitzes. So there's something to be said about that, but I feel like he gets his hand in a number of passing lanes, breaks up a decent number of passes. He's been a really good blitzer for us. And best play of the year for him was easily this one right here, a 104-yard, I think, interception returned for a touchdown. $17 million is too much for Victor Giles. If I had the option, knowing now how expensive our roster is going to be, would I pay it to him? I honestly don't know, because I don't know if we're going to be able to afford anyone. We might have to let Victor Giles go eventually, but until that time, I am very pleased with him. Quincy Boston here. Once again, career low in tackles, but that might be a good thing. Didn't have nearly as many deflections as last year either. Excuse me. But I feel like with Quincy, he was still the same old Quincy Boston. Stats do not tell the story with this guy, because you know what happens with good corners? They just tend not to be targeted as much. And there weren't a lot of instances when I went through and made this highlight reel that I was like, why is Quincy Boston giving this up? Every now and then, he won't be able to make a play because he's kind of short. Maybe size-wise, you think he's an inside corner. He's 5'10", but I think that problem only rears its head very rarely with him. And I gotta say, I think overall, maybe I'm a little bit disappointed with this pass defense. Most games, it's good. It's where I want it to be. But every now and then, we just cannot stop anything. But I don't think it's Quincy Boston's fault. Morris Morgan was another one of the guys last year that I said I was a little bit disappointed in. And he's another guy that stepped it up a ton. 4 times more deflections than he got last year. Forced a fumble. 3 more picks. Certainly not a perfect corner by any means, but in terms of secondary players with the most highlights, Morris Morgan got that by a long shot. Still can give up plays occasionally, but last year at the end of the year, I said I'd maybe keep JT Bean over Morris Morgan. Well, Morris Morgan took that personally, and he came out and he had a great year, finally showing that size and athleticism combo that can really make a great corner. He showed that this year, gave up a lot less plays, especially deep plays. We're seeing a lot of balls that he's breaking up deep here. I feel like underneath people can still get them, but I mean, if you have to choose one, I'd rather you get beat underneath, but be really short up top than the other way around, and that's what he has been. And like I said, when I went through everyone, I don't know why our pass game had trouble at times, because I feel like mostly everyone played good. We're gonna get to one player that I think had a really underwhelming year here in a minute, but Morris Morgan was not one of them. He had more deflections this year than Quincy Boston had last year. I was praising the heck out of Quincy Boston for all of his deflections. So yeah, I got to give the man his credit where it's due. Maybe potentially a year where he can go up to superstar with numbers like that. Didn't make it to the Pro Bowl. I've been forgetting to talk about who made it to the Pro Bowl and who didn't. Only had 2 defenders make it to the Pro Bowl. That was George McLean and Timmy Reed. Nobody else from the defense made the Pro Bowl, which is kind of unfortunate. Offensively, basically the entire offense made the Pro Bowl. I'll just try to go through who did. Eddie Hazelton made the Pro Bowl. Lewis Smart made the Pro Bowl. Kevon Simmons made the Pro Bowl. Brandon Nash made the Pro Bowl. And then, as we'll talk about later when we bring those players up, but the entire offensive line made the Pro Bowl this year. Kind of nuts. But real quick, back to Morris Morgan before his highlights are up. Absolutely, stepped up to the challenge that I gave him last year. Was underwhelming, came up, had his best career year, and he's developing what hopefully could be a very good corner tandem with Boston. JT Bean is the player that I was alluding to before, who I think had a disappointing year this year. After a very promising rookie year where he proved to be a playmaker, he really didn't make many plays here. Like, that's the kind of play we're starting his highlight reel with. Is that probably the least highlight worthy play we've shown in the whole entire reel? It's just there weren't a ton of highlights to show of JT Bean. Most of them weren't even making great plays on the ball. Like, we see that one right there. That was good. But a lot of them were just coming up and making tackles. And so I said that last postseason, I guess, that I would keep JT Bean over Morris Morgan. I would not do that anymore. I need JT Bean to step it up. Darius Conner is a guy. I always have a tough time evaluating Darius Conner because he kind of like Boston. His value is in the fact that he plays really good coverage and he's not targeted a ton. At the same time, he's a 90-something overall X-Factor safety. I need to start seeing him make more plays. Just being good in coverage is, I don't know if it's good enough anymore. A lot of these plays that we're seeing him make, and even him and his companion there, Delvin Walls, I feel like a lot of the safety plays that were made were when we used them in the red zone, as we see on this play here against the Giants. I needed to take control of these safeties for them to do much of anything that was highlight worthy, it felt like. And so I'd like to see him maybe make more plays on the ball, maybe become kind of like a bait guy who makes the quarterback think it's open and then comes up and makes a pick, something like that. But I just wish he made more plays, but I feel like he's solid. Delvin Walls here is more of the playmaker kind of safety, but this year the plays weren't as frequent as they were the previous year. He had more big plays last year and he was out for a big part of it. He was available for the entirety of this year. And of course, a big play here against the Cleveland Browns. but just felt like running backs were breaking off of his tackles more often this year, which was a big part of his playmaking ability last year. So he could just make one-on-one tackles with consistency. Still a good player. I like Delvin Walls a lot, but I'm not as high on him now as I was coming out of year 4. I'll just say that. I think the big plays are a little bit inconsistent, so you have to maybe just be optimistic that more of the forced fumbles and the big plays will be coming next season, and I am optimistic of that. He has the ratings that should make him a decent playmaker, and I like the player. I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but now we're going to talk about the offensive line and what they did this year. All 5 starters named to the Pro Bowl. That is something else. I know once again with my Philadelphia Eagles, they have everyone's either a Pro Bowler or a Pro Bowl alternate this year, but they don't even have 5 Pro Bowl players. Ryan Pearson allowed 1 more sack than last year, but he's really stepped into his own as an elite tackle. He's actually had a much better year than last year. Cedric Gallimore, I have no idea how this guy is a Pro Bowler. He continues to get worse in terms of sacks allowed every year. That's the one that I was legitimately surprised by. 2 guards allowing only 1 sack. Kind of joked last year that Jerome Snell halves his sacks allowed every year. Well, that trend continues 1 year further still. Rashard Younger, he allowed just 1 sack. I really like Rashard Younger as an offensive lineman. I said it last year, and it will remain so. He's my second favorite offensive lineman. Matthew Welker, his best year since his rookie year. Of course, the field goal long of 69 was a game winner. It was also nice. And his 1 miss was a blocked kick. Lance Cook, I'd really have to check the rest of the league to know how he did. So let's get into that league first here with passing. Tucker Clinton led the league in yards. Had a decent bit of quarterbacks going over 5,000, including 2 generated players. Brandon Nash led the league in passing touchdowns. Anthony Cloud just 1 behind him. So you maybe think Anthony Cloud could win MVP over Brandon Nash. 4 less picks, 1 less interception, more yards. Kyler Murray led the league in interceptions, though. So a very high year for Brandon Nash, but it wasn't like he was up at the top of the league. Alluded to this before, but Kevon Simmons leads the league by nearly 500 yards. In terms of players who actually carried the ball, he had the best average. No surprise there. Rushing touchdowns in general, I feel like need to be calmed down a little bit in this game. Like I have to have a high quarter total just to keep up with the league. Of course, I was trying to finish his thought while we looked at it, but the 7 fumbles for Kevon Simmons are kind of upsetting, to be honest. He shouldn't be fumbling. He has 99 carrying. He ends up being second in the league in receiving yards. And in terms of touchdowns, Chris Godwin has been an absolute god in this simulation. I feel like he has 20 receiving touchdowns every year. The Broncos tackles sucked. We'll just say that and leave it there. Troy Anderson led the league in tackles. That's fun. DeForest Buckner, it says led the league in TFLs, but both of our defensive tackles had more than that. Myles Garrett, the only one with more sacks than George McLean, who led us in sacks this year. And that's kind of it for the defense. In terms of field goals, Matthew Welker had the most in the league. And only 1 guy had a better percentage than him. So he's also a Pro Bowler. I forgot to mention that. And then in terms of punting, Lance Cook did not make the Pro Bowl, but a solid year. Net average wasn't anything crazy though. Offensively, we knew we were number 1 in the league. Passing, we weren't anything special, but we had 600 more yards, almost, I guess, than anyone else in the league in rushing. Most passing touchdowns and second most rushing touchdowns, I guess, tied for that. Most first downs defensively. We're around top 5 or so there against the pass. We allowed the 4th most pass yards in the league. Like I said, there was just times when I felt like teams could pass the ball at will against us. Our run defense was stellar once again, kind of like last year, but it felt better this year, maybe at least more consistent. Allowed the 3rd fewest points, had the most sacks. But in terms of turnovers, there's a big regression in turnovers just in general. I mentioned it when Delvin Wall's not being as much of a playmaker, but just the entire defense honestly wasn't as good at making plays this year. Best 3rd down percentage in the league. That was something I wanted to get better at this year. We succeeded in that. The other one was red zone, and I don't believe we got better in the red zone. We're just talking about red zone efficiency. We're not anywhere near the top. Imagine we might be near the bottom. Where are we? Yeah, in the middle, maybe towards the bottom. So still something I'd like to get better at next year. Defensive efficiency, we're pretty good. And then with users, you're just not going to have as many of a penalty. We had tied for the 2nd worst turnover differential after having the best last year. So yeah, definitely a huge regression there. But now that the stats are over and done with, it is time to look at awards for the year. What will we get? Brandon Nash will win 2nd straight MVP. Not entirely surprising, as he had 59 total touchdowns this year, led the league in passing touchdowns. I thought the interceptions might take him out of it, but they did not. Eli Manning wins Coach of the Year. No surprise there with the undefeated season. For Offensive Player of the Year, that was Joe Mixon ahead of Kevon Simmons. That's ridiculous. Timmy Reed ends up being 2nd in Defensive Player of the Year, and George McLean 3rd. Joey Vasquez is 2nd in Offensive Rookie of the Year, and we're not going to have anyone defensively. So this is the first year. It took us till year 5 to not have a Rookie of the Year. I honestly thought it might take even longer than that. Eddie Hazelton is the 2nd best receiver. Snell, Younger are 4th and 5th best linemen. They actually put some of our starters there, so that's nice. Of course, McLean there, and Timmy Reed in terms of best defensive lineman. Morris Morgan up there in best defensive backs. Maybe he gets superstar. Matthew Welker wins best kicker. And that's it for this stats and awards and highlights episode. Thanks everybody for watching. We will be back soon with the Super Bowl episode, trying to be the first team ever to win 20 games regular season playoffs in one season. The episode will be coming out soon, and I will see you then.